We have country music legend George Strait. George, thank you very much.
George Strait is one of the country's most respected artists, a man whose work has always spoken louder than anything. But lately, there's been a strange buzz around him, and it has nothing to do with his music. It's about the life he lived when no one was watching. Because for over 35 years, nobody realized George Strait was living a double life, until now. So what was he hiding all these years? And why is the truth about his double life suddenly coming out? Join us as we get into all the shocking details. George Strait's secret, beginnings, the untold story that changed everything. George Harvey Strait didn't grow up chasing fame. He started life on May 18, 1952, in the small town of Poteet, Texas. The kind of place where the sun hits the dirt early and every family knows the weight of hard work. His parents, John Byron Strait Sr. and Doris Jean Cooser, had their own story carved into that Texas soil. And tucked quietly into his family tree was a surprising connection. George was a second cousin to Jackie Bezos, the mother of Jeff Bezos. It's the kind of detail people only mention in passing, but it hints at how unexpected destiny can be. He spent his childhood in nearby Pearsall, in Frio County, where his father balanced two identities: a junior high math teacher during the week and the owner of a 2,000-acre cattle ranch on the side. That ranch, spread wide outside Big Wells, became George's real classroom. Weekends weren't for resting. Summers weren't for drifting. The Strait family was out there moving cattle, fixing fences, and feeling the land breathe under their boots. But life wasn't as steady as the Texas horizon. When George was in the 4th grade, his parents split, and the entire rhythm of his world shifted. His mother left with his sister Pensy, leaving George and his brother Buddy to be raised by their father. From that point on, ranching wasn't just family work. It was the backbone of his upbringing, the thing that kept those three Strait men tied together. Still, even with calloused hands and that ranch life shaping him, something else was stirring in him. At Pearsall High School, George found himself stepping into music, not the country sound he'd eventually master, but rock and roll. He joined a little garage band called the Stoics, a group pulled into the orbit of the Beatles and the whole British invasion wave. George would often mention how those bands hit like a spark, how he spent hours listening to them, studying them, trying to capture that magic with his friends. He bounced from band to band through high school, chasing that sound, chasing that feeling. But somewhere along the line, the compass shifted. Rock gave way to something that felt more like home. Country music started tugging at him, not through the radio because he barely listened to that. If he turned the dial at all, it was for the news or the farmer's report. His real introduction to country came from something far more alive. The music floating through Texas towns on Saturday nights. Live performances pouring out of bars and dance halls. Voices shaped by Hank Thompson, Lefty Frizzell, Merle Haggard, George Jones, Bob Wills, and Hank Williams. He absorbed it piece by piece until those influences settled deep. Then came December 4th, 1971, the day George Strait stepped into an entirely different world. He enlisted in the United States Army as an infantryman. One chapter snapped closed, and another kicked open. While stationed at Schofield Barracks in Hawaii, he auditioned for an Army-sponsored country band called Rambling Country. And the moment they heard him, the direction of his life changed again. The band performed on bass, off bass, everywhere they could, even taking on a second identity as Santee. Music stopped being a casual interest and started becoming a path. He served until 1975 and rose to the rank of corporal. By the time he was honorably discharged, he wasn't the teenage ranch kid from Pearsall anymore. He was a man who had carried discipline on his back, music in his pocket, and a growing sense of who he wanted to be. When he returned to Texas, he didn't immediately chase Nashville or leap into the industry. Instead, he did something that kept him grounded. He enrolled at Southwest Texas State University in San Marcos. Agriculture became his focus, probably because the land had always been the one thing he understood deeply. He earned his degree, walked the stage, and carried on building the kind of life that wasn't loud but was steady. Years later, the university honored him again with an honorary doctorate in a private ceremony, recognizing not just his success, but the loyalty he'd shown to the school. Back in 1985, long before awards and headlines, George had already created an endowment fund to help develop and operate the Freeman Ranch for agricultural and wildlife purposes, turning his childhood roots into something that could outlast him. Every step, from the ranch to the garage bands, from Army barracks in Hawaii to university classrooms, built the foundation of the man people think they know today. But behind the fame, behind the polished cowboy image, this part of his story reveals a quieter truth. George Strait didn't stumble into greatness. He built it piece by piece, in places most people never looked. And now that the world is finally paying attention to the hidden chapters of his life, one question lingers. What other parts of George Strait's past are just now coming to light? And how much deeper does this double life truly go? Keep watching to find out. George Strait, the moment everything almost ended, and the choice that saved his career. By the time George Strait settled into college life, you'd think his path was set. Ranch kid? Army veteran? Agriculture student? Simple, straightforward. But life has a habit of cracking open new doors when you're least expecting it. And for George, that door was a little flyer taped to a wall on campus. A country band called Stony Ridge needed a vocalist. George figured he'd give it a try, and that one decision changed everything. The band took one look at what he could do and slid him right into the spotlight. And George, being George, didn't just join. He remolded the group entirely. He renamed them the Ace in the Hole Band, stepped up as the leader, and pushed them straight into the honky-tonks scattered across South and Central Texas. They'd load up, drive hours to Huntsville or Houston, play their hearts out, and head home smelling like beer, sweat, and ambition. Texas crowds started catching on. The band opened for acts with real weight, the Texas Playboys, and Asleep at the Wheel. And suddenly, they weren't just some college band messing around. They were becoming a force of their own. It wasn't long before someone offered them a shot at recording. They cut a few straight-written tracks for the Houston-based D Records, including That Don't Change the Way I Feel About You and I Can't Go On Dying Like This. George poured himself into those songs, but the industry didn't bite. The singles came and went quietly. And while the band chased dreams at night, George still managed his family's cattle ranch during the day. A double life long before the world accused him of having one. But every music story needs a pivot moment. And George's came through Irv Woolsey, a bar owner with just enough Nashville history to open a few doors. He noticed George, believed in him, and used his old connections to get Nashville insiders to come down to Texas and listen. The music impressed them. The Western swing style didn't. They couldn't imagine how to package it. So they left. No offer, no second meeting, just another closed door. George didn't quit, though. Not yet. He kept making those long, exhausting trips to Nashville with Kent Finley from the Cheatham Street warehouse. They'd walk into label offices, pitch George's sound, and walk back out with the same answer every time. No. Eventually, the rejection piled high enough for doubt to settle in. George started wondering if it was time to walk away. A job offer designing cattle pens slid across the table, and for the first time, it looked like he might take it. He even told the band he was done. The dream had cost too much, stretched too long, and given too little in return. But the story didn't end there. His wife sat him down and asked him to give it one more year. Just one. One more push. One more chance to prove the dream wasn't dead. That conversation kept him from stepping out of music entirely. And not long after that, everything shifted. MCA Records finally came calling. But even then, they didn't roll out a red carpet. They offered him a deal for one song, just one. If it hit, they'd talk albums. If it didn't, the door would slam shut again. George took it. He kept the ace in the hole band by his side as his official touring and backup group, refusing to leave behind the people who built those smoky bar nights with him. And in the spring of 1981, he released that make-or-break single, Unwound. That song didn't just do well. It changed the entire trajectory of his life. It shot to number 6 on the Billboard Hot Country Songs chart, paving the way for his debut album, Straight Country. And the album? Critics jumped on it instantly, calling it a new traditionalist breakthrough. Country had wandered too far into pop territory, and George's sound snapped it back to its roots. He kept the momentum rolling with Straight from the Heart in 1982, the album that delivered his first #1 hit, Fool-Hearted Memory, and gave him Amarillo by Morning, the Western ballad that would follow him everywhere for the rest of his life. Then came 1983, a turning point disguised as chaos. Eddie Rabbitt got sick before his appearance at the Houston Livestock Show and Rodeo, and George stepped in as the replacement. That last-minute performance turned into a legacy. Over the years, George played that rodeo more than 20 times, drawing in more than 1 million fans. The numbers kept stacking up, the records kept climbing, and the decade became his. 17 #1 hits in the 1980s alone. A 5-song streak from 1983 to 1984. Albums like Right or Wrong, Does Fort Worth Ever Cross Your Mind, and Something Special took over the charts. Awards piled in. His greatest hits collection dropped in 1985. By 1986, he was winning CMA Vocalist of the Year again and releasing #7, yet another #1 album. But underneath all the success, it's easy to forget one thing: George Strait almost quit. He was one conversation away from walking off the path entirely. The relentless pursuit of a recording contract, the constant rejections, and the uncertainty of making music for a living had pushed him to the edge. And yet, it was Norma, the same high school sweetheart, who had stood by him through the Army, through early gigs in tiny Texas venues, and through the birth of their daughter, Jennifer, who convinced him to give it one more year. Because of that single decision, the path that seemed nearly closed swung wide open. That conversation didn't just save a career. It preserved the legacy that would transform George Strait into the country legend the world knows today. It's a stark reminder that behind every record-breaking album, behind every sold-out arena, there's a story the public never sees: the late-night doubts, the crossroads, the quiet voices urging you to keep going when everything inside says stop. Strait's path was never guaranteed, and that one pivotal choice is what changed everything, setting the stage for decades of hits, heartfelt performances, and a life spent quietly shaping the sound of country music while keeping his personal world intact. And yet, even a career built on such unstoppable momentum couldn't shield him from the scrutiny and challenges of life off stage. As the controversy over his Memorial Day post would later show, proof that the man who keeps the music front and center is still human, still vulnerable, and still navigating the delicate balance between private grief, public perception, and the legacy he's spent a lifetime building. George Strait's Memorial Day post backfired, and fans did not hold back. George Strait has spent his entire career steering clear of drama. He's the kind of artist who lets the music do the talking, keeps his name out of messy headlines, and rarely sparks the kind of backlash that follows most celebrities around. But this time, the storm came straight to his doorstep, and it all started with a single Memorial Day post. On May 26th, the 78-year-old country legend shared what he probably thought was a simple tribute on Instagram. The message read, "God bless our heroes who made the ultimate sacrifice. Happy Memorial Day." The photo showed him smiling, with bold text across the image that said, "Happy Memorial Day." It looked harmless on the surface, the kind of patriotic message people expect from someone like him, but that one word, happy, cracked the calm. Within minutes, the comment section shifted from quiet appreciation to a wave of discomfort. Some followers didn't hold back as they reminded him that Memorial Day isn't just another holiday with barbecues and flags. For many families, especially those who lost loved ones in service, the day carries a weight that doesn't fit inside a cheerful greeting. One user kept it short, writing that the day was not happy, but thanks. Another voice came in sharper, reminding him that it isn't a happy day. A widow of a U.S. Marine stepped into the comments to explain how painful that word really felt, expressing that there is nothing happy about a day built on remembrance, loss, and sacrifice. As more comments rolled in, the tone was the same. People weren't angry at George himself, but they felt the message missed the mark. Some even pleaded with his team to fix it, urging them to remove what they saw as insensitive wording. And then, quietly, without any announcement or explanation, the post disappeared, deleted, gone from his page, as if it had never existed. For a man who almost never finds himself in controversy, this little moment hit harder than anyone expected. It wasn't loud, it wasn't scandalous, but it stirred something in his fans. A reminder that even the most beloved artists can step into territory more fragile than it seems. But if there's one thing that has anchored him through fame, tragedy, and decades of relentless work, it's love. George Strait and Norma, the love story that outlived fame, tragedy, and 53 unbreakable years. For a man who built his entire legacy on steady hands and quiet strength, the one place where George Strait never slipped was love. Long before the awards, the stadium tours, and the #1 hits, there was Norma, the girl he met back in high school, the girl who kept showing up in his life until it was clear she wasn't meant to leave. They started off like most teenage romances do, drifting in and out, never fully sure if what they felt was timing or destiny. But by December 4th, 1971, George was done questioning it. They eloped in Mexico, sealing their story long before the world decided to crown him the king of country music. Days later, he enlisted in the army and shipped off to Hawaii, and she followed him into that new chapter without hesitation. They were young, 19 and 17, but they carried themselves like two people who already knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, yet still wanted to walk it together. And for the next 5 decades, they proved exactly that. They welcomed their daughter, Jennifer Lynn, in 1972, and 9 years later, their son Bubba came along. Their family felt full, grounded, and exactly right, until tragedy came for them too soon. In 1986, Jennifer died in a car accident at just 13. No fame, no success, no money could cushion that kind of loss. George later reflected that they were blessed to have those 13 years with her, but that kind of blessing leaves a scar too deep to fade. From the outside, fans saw George go quieter during those years, choosing privacy over public vulnerability. But behind that silence was Norma, holding their family together, showing up for Bubba, and protecting what was left of their world. They refused to let grief define Jennifer's memory. Instead, they created the Jennifer Strait Memorial Foundation, a living tribute to a girl they loved fiercely and lost far too soon. George wrote on the foundation's website that Jennifer had so many friends that he and Norma could barely keep up with all of them, and that her bond with Bubba was something almost sacred. It was clear their daughter had shaped their family in ways that would never stop. As George's career climbed into the stratosphere, Norma stayed home and raised Bubba, keeping the rhythm of their life steady while he traveled from stage to stage. He often credited her for being the backbone of everything, not just the marriage, but the entire Strait universe. He shared that they found each other more than 40 years ago and somehow managed to love each other and still genuinely like each other through the entire journey. When Bubba finally grew up and left for college, Norma started joining George on the road. They made up for lost time, turning hotels and tour buses into new versions of home. And their family kept expanding too. Bubba and his wife, Tamara, gave them 2 grandchildren, Harvey, born in 2012, and Jillian, born in 2016. George loved talking about how lucky they were that Bubba and Tamara lived just down the street, which meant he and Norma could show up for everything: school moments, holidays, or just spontaneous afternoons. Bubba didn't just inherit the family name, he inherited the creative spark. He became a competitive rodeo cowboy, a songwriter, and eventually even a collaborator. George shared that writing with Bubba brought him back into songwriting after years of focusing more on performing. He described watching Bubba blossom into a writer as one of the most rewarding experiences of his late career. Norma, meanwhile, always moved with elegance. She never chased fame, never fought for the spotlight, and never treated George's world as her own. Yet every once in a while, she'd step into it effortlessly, like in 2019, when she made a surprise appearance in his Código music video. Shot in Mexico, the video captured her laughing, toasting, dancing, and little glimpses of the woman who stayed right beside George through all the highs and lows. She stood proudly with him at award shows, including major moments like the 1989 CMA Awards and the 2024 Willie Nelson Lifetime Achievement Award. During that 2024 speech, George looked out at the crowd and acknowledged that Norma had supported him for just shy of 53 years, a reminder that no award shines brighter than a love that refuses to wear out. Their marriage wasn't built on theatrics, it wasn't loud, it wasn't performative, it was steady, private, and intentional. And on their 50th anniversary in December 2021, George marked the moment in a way only he could. He serenaded her with "I Cross My Heart" in Las Vegas. He told the audience about being 19 and knowing this girl named Norma, calling her really hot, and remembering how they fell in love, ran off to Mexico, and promised themselves to each other exactly 50 years earlier. The crowd got to witness something rare. Not just a performance, but the truth behind decades of music. Not the king of country, but the man who built a life with his high school sweetheart and never looked back. Norma Strait isn't just George Strait's wife. She's the thread running through every era of his story. The girl from Pearsall who became the center of a life millions admire. The mother who held the family together during their darkest nights. The grandmother who shows up for her grandkids. The partner who traveled through love, loss, fame, and everything in between without letting the world change who she was. George Strait lived a double life for 35 years and no one knew until now. George Strait built his entire career on steadiness. No scandals, no chaos, no messy tabloid distractions. Just a man, his voice, and a catalog of songs that felt like they were carved straight out of American soil. He was the last artist anyone expected to have a story hiding behind the curtain. But the truth is, the biggest tragedy of his life didn't just shape the man, it reshaped everything the world thought it knew about him. And it created the double life he carried quietly for more than 3 decades. It all goes back to a moment that cracked his world wide open. Long before he became King George, he was just a 20-year-old kid who had married his high school sweetheart, Norma Voss, after eloping to Mexico in 1971. He was enlisted in the Army, stationed in Hawaii, trying to figure out adulthood while the world around him kept shifting. That's where their first child, Jennifer, spelt with a single N, was born on October 6, 1972. George and Norma were barely starting their lives, and suddenly they were parents, far from home, far from Texas, and far from anything that looked like stability. When George was discharged from the Army in 1975, he took his young family back to Texas, settling in San Marcos and enrolling at what is now Texas State University. He formed the Ace in the Hole band, and in those early years, he wasn't chasing fame. He was just playing music in smoky rooms like Cheatham Street Warehouse and Gruen Hall, trying to make life make sense. But by the early 80s, things started to shift. A record deal with MCA, trips back and forth to Nashville, a slow climb that turned into a rapid ascent. Number ones in 82, 83, and 84. Awards, a growing fan base, a career catching fire. And through it all, George kept his home base in San Marcos to protect his family from the pressure that comes with success. By 1986, everything in his professional life was lining up perfectly. He had become one of the biggest names in country music, the kind of artist who could step on stage and silence a room with the first note. Then came June 25th. Jennifer, just 13 years old, was riding through San Marcos late that night with a few friends in a Ford Mustang. Teenagers. A summer night. Nothing unusual. But one sharp turn changed everything. The car skidded, flipped, and landed upside down in a ditch. 3 of the kids walked away with minor injuries. Jennifer didn't. She was partially ejected from the vehicle and died at the scene. No seatbelts, no alcohol, just speed, inexperience, and a moment that can't be undone. The driver, 18-year-old Gregory Wilson Allen, was later charged with Class A vehicular homicide. But no legal outcome could touch the depth of what George and Norma were facing. Losing a child is the kind of wound that doesn't go away. It just buries itself deep and stays there. Jennifer was laid to rest in Pearsall, Texas, after a service at First United Methodist Church in San Marcos. The world kept moving, but George Strait didn't, at least not in the same way. The man who had once been private now became unreachable. He made a decision that shaped the next 35 years of his life. He stopped giving interviews. Completely. No radio stops. No magazine profiles. No sit-downs. Nothing that would open the door for anyone to poke at the deepest pain of his life. In one of the extremely rare interviews he granted decades later, George shared that he had reached a point where he told himself that if refusing interviews cost him his career, then so be it, because it was the only way he could cope. And that decision became the foundation of the double life fans never realized he was living. On stage, he was untouchable, calm, steady, and iconic. Offstage, he was a grieving father who built thick walls around his personal life because it was the only way he could survive the loss. The world saw the legend. His inner circle saw the man holding a family together after its most devastating fracture. But here's the part that still stuns people. During the years immediately following Jennifer's death, the years when most performers might collapse, George Strait delivered one of the strongest runs in country music history. 11 consecutive #1 singles, 2 CMA Entertainer of the Year wins, albums that defined an entire era. And woven into that stretch of hits was a song fans have long believed was connected to Jennifer, Baby Blue, never officially confirmed, but the emotional weight behind it has spoken loudly enough for decades. To honor his daughter's memory, George and his family created the Jennifer Lynn Strait Foundation, supporting children's charities in the San Antonio area, quiet work that reflected the way he lived the rest of his life, giving privately, grieving privately, surviving privately. If Jennifer were alive today, she would be 55 years old. George Strait still has his son, George Strait Jr., known as Bubba, and the two often write together now, but the impact of losing his daughter is carved into the man he became. The stoic presence, the unshakable calm, and the quiet dignity. It all traces back to that night in 1986. So when people talk about his double life, this is what they mean. For 35 years, the world saw the king. But behind that crown was a father who chose silence over spectacle, privacy over publicity, and family over everything. And in its own quiet way, that silence became part of what made him legendary. Which of George Strait's songs is still your favorite to this very day? Let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Also, click the next video shown on your screen. You will enjoy it.